Hey everybody, I'm Pastor Siri. I'm a Lutheran pastor. I'm also a spiritual seeker. And today I want to ask you, do you talk to trees? What do I mean? Take a listen. So my husband is out of town for this week, and he asked me to do some of the outdoor chores that he normally does, involving putting fresh, clean water in the bird bath, and we have a couple of them in various parts of our yard. And as I was just walking around, I paused and I looked up at the beautiful trees that we have in our yard. And one of my personal goals in this next year is to get to know the names of the different trees that are in my neighborhood. When I walk around in my neighborhood, I notice all of these beautiful trees, and I'm starting to pick out the differences in the bark and in their leaves, and I really want to know what they all are. Like, oh, that's a deciduous tree, and that's an evergreen, that's a maple, is about as far as I can go, which is really kind of sad. But I want to get to know at least the trees that are in my yard pretty well. But also, as I was standing there looking up at the tree, I just decided to tell the tree how much I loved it and how much I loved all the trees in my yard. I said, thank you for housing the squirrels and the birds nests and everything. And thank you for giving shade on our house. And you're just beautiful. I hope you're having a good time. I hope you enjoy being on this yard. And one of the things my husband and I have been trying to do with our land is actually to sort of change the perspective that we have on ownership of land. Meaning, when we look out and we see all of the squirrels and the birds and the rabbits that are on our property, and we have quite a few just because we have bird feeders, and so they all benefit from that. We also see possums, we see little foxes on our trail cam that we have. These animals don't understand property ownership. The plants don't understand property ownership. That is a human-made invention, that we form these little lines and we parcel up land and we sell it to people who can do whatever they want to the land. And then often we will, do what we want to make it look pretty and our standards without even thinking how it might shift the ecosystem of the plants and the animals on that land. One of the things that really bothers me when I go for walks is that I will see those little signs in the summer on people's lawns that are like, keep your children and pets because this has been chemically treated because we want our lawn to look beautiful. And my first thought is, you know who can't read that sign? The squirrels and the rabbits and the birds and the worms and the bugs who are probably living on or moving through your lawn, and you might be making them sick. And that is creating bad ripple effects for the whole ecosystem, because you have a little mouse that gets sick because of the chemicals you put in your lawn, and then a bird of prey eats it, and then that bird of prey gets sick. And all of these unconscious little ways that we just don't think about how we're harming the rest of the natural world. My husband and I have been, he's been doing all of the work of creating more native plants in our backyard. We were doing that for many reasons, but the biggest is for the bees and for the butterflies, for those pollinators that we absolutely need in order to survive as a human race. Plus, they just deserve to live on their own right. Animals deserve to live, plants deserve to live. And there might be times that, we have to do something to just help balance the ecosystem, like if there's too much of one thing or something's causing harm elsewhere. But we do that with deep respectfulness. And so we've been thinking a lot about our yard and the animals and the plants that live in our yard, and making sure that we're creating a healthy ecosystem where we're not introducing any chemicals or we're not doing something to our lawn just because it looks pretty, but rather thinking about how that affects the whole ecosystem. And I've had just some observations about my relationship with plants and animals in the last few years that I'd never really had much in my life. And to be honest, I think most of us who grew up in a Western, Christian dominant sort of perspective, we have been taught to be pretty removed from nature. We've been taught to see nature as like we're the top of the pyramid, and then, animals and plants and are down here, and that we can do whatever we want with them, right? We can do whatever we want with plants and animals. And this goes into the ways in which we've hunted animals for sport, that we've enslaved animals to be in zoos, or there's just been some really awful things we've done with animals for our own pleasure. I was horrified to learn that there are more tigers in captivity in Texas than there are in the wild, and that is awful. These are wild animals that deserve to have a fullness of life. And I see so many videos online of people who have wild cats in these enclosures, and they go up and they're playing with the wild cats. And I wouldn't think much about that, except for the fact that I've learned through a really good accredited animal sanctuaries that that is potentially harmful for humans, but it's also damaging to the animal. That often they're not given the respect that they deserve to be wild. And then if they do something violent, which would be in their nature, then they're often hurt or abused or even killed for that reason, for just acting out of their nature. So there's so much that we're learning about giving honor and credit to animals and allowing them to be and to live in their own right. And this is true of trees and plants. We're just starting to understand that like trees communicate with each other, and that like what even are mushrooms? Nobody can classify mushrooms, and yet they have these unbelievable properties to them that we're just discovering. The ego of the human is that because we speak with our mouth and we have language and we can drive in cars and we can shoot guns, that we're so damn smart. And we're smarter than anything else, and we can do whatever the hell we want because we can justify it. And we have caused so much suffering in the animal world. We've caused so much suffering on over the whole planet. And it's finally starting to kick back and kick us in the butt. But this is what I'm learning is like environmentalism isn't just a game here that's like, got to think about how to protect the environment for my sake, or like, oh, this is morally wrong. I also, yes to that, but also I've been taught in the last few years to see my relationship with plants and animals. And even though I'm a lot of an indoor girl, I sit here and I look outside my window and I watch the interplay of the animals as they're living their life. And it's beautiful and it's amazing, and I want to protect it. And there's so much beauty in the world, and we're so removed from it that we don't often realize that we can actually interact with this creation. A lot of indigenous peoples around the whole world have the belief, from a slower culture that actually took the time to practice doing this, that you can communicate with all the different peoples. The tree peoples, the winged creatures, like all living things are kind of a people who have a means of communicating. And just because they don't speak with English doesn't mean they can't communicate. And we often poo-poo this. We're like, oh, that's new age woo-woo stupid stuff, like, rah, rah, rah. But that's because, again, we're so arrogant and we're so moving so quickly, so loud and so fast, that if we haven't experienced it, it must not be real. But I've been challenged on retreats I've been to by beautiful books I've read where they've said, just do it. Just go out for 20 minutes, find a tree, find a plant, find an animal, and sit and just shut up and listen and see if you hear anything. I did this at a retreat a couple years ago, the one that I led, where I had people go out and I said, just find something, doesn't matter what, find what grabs your eye. And just open yourself up to it and see if you receive any messages. And all of them did. And these are people who'd never done this before. These are all people of a Christian background who've lived in cities, who work in regular places. Every single one of them came back with this beautiful, profound, like, it's simple. It wasn't like they learned how to, time travel or anything like that. It wasn't complicated. It was like a simple, beautiful message that touched them. And maybe it's your imagination, maybe it's your own higher self talking to you, but what if the wisdom that has been like suppressed, repressed, oppressed, destroyed by these colonizing, violent, awful people that have moved throughout the planet and just gone to some of these more peaceful societies and just been like, nope, this is the way of it is, men in charge, blah, 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 and we're going to kill you if you don't believe what we believe, and blah, 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 you got to fit in this box, blah, 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 blah. What if some of this knowledge that was lost, partially, or at least kept hidden, is the medicine that we need to come back to? Now, I'm a pastor, I'm a Christian, I'm a Lutheran, and I also am deeply critical of the imperial church. And I say imperial church because I believe that ever since Constantine came to power and decided that he was going to make the Roman Empire Christian, shit went sideways, and really beautiful perspectives of Christianity that could have been, that were much more in connection with nature, that still honored the feminine and the divine feminine, that allowed for an honoring of ourselves as good and creation as good, that all just got called heresy and thrown away, and domination started to happen. And with that domination that started to happen, the way we viewed our bodies changed, the way we viewed women changed, the way we viewed sex changed, the way we viewed nature changed, and it all became objects to control and to use, and resources that you can dominate, rather than all an interwoven piece of the sacred. And so I'm passionate about finding a way of living in this world in the name of Jesus that is healthy and holy and beautiful and gentle and loving and just and merciful for all living things, that we remember and reconcile the web of being that has always been there, that is there whether we regard it or not, that we re-engage with the web of being, which, by the way, because it's a web, it is horizontal, it is not vertical. It is something of which we are a part of, that only when we stop and shut up and listen and get out in nature and have some really good teachers can our eyes and our hearts be opened enough that we can start to notice. And so I just say that to you, like, regardless of the time of year, what's going on, or what noisy things are happening in your neighborhood or where you are, if it is possible for you to just go out and find a plant or a tree or an animal and just look at them, and for a moment just acknowledge them as completely equal in the creation, and that they have every right to be there, regardless of what they're doing to your lawn or rah, 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 rah. I've had so many conversations with people of an older generation who did not grow up with this thinking at all, and it's really hard for them to wrap their brain around the idea of just letting animals be, and that maybe you don't cut down all the trees in your yard just because you're tired of raking anymore, that maybe you don't get to just do whatever the hell you want to do with creation without asking it first, without seeing if maybe you have a responsibility to it rather than it just being something that you can do whatever you want to with. And that is what I'm learning, and that is what I'm trying to do more of. And when I have these experiences of getting messages from my tree friends, it's so peaceful, and it makes me feel like I belong to something so much bigger than the craziness of this world. And I think we need to restore that. We need to bring that back. So I offer that to you, to take a moment to practice listening to the plants and animals, to just envision them as being living, breathing beings that have a right to exist, and that maybe you have a responsibility to them, and that they're not resources, they're not things, that they have maybe a consciousness and intelligence we don't understand, that might be very, very different from humans, but that doesn't mean they don't have it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And the last thing I'll say is, Jesus doesn't talk much about creation, probably because back in his time, people were living constantly in creation. It was just a no-brainer. There weren't atom bombs, and there weren't like giant machines and huge things that had such and giant corporations that just had this massive ability to destroy creation at the level in which we are doing. I bet if that was the case, Jesus would have had to say a lot about our relationship with it. But he just sort of takes it for granted in his parables and talking about farming and talking about and going to the Mount of Olives. It's just sort of natural. It was just sort of imbued with this sense of like, yes, we're a part of all things and we have our little place, but there's just this knowledge that we're here with all things. And I would imagine that he just had that deeper sense of interconnectedness that we have lost, but he'd never really maybe felt like he should say anything about it because it wasn't back then what's happening now, if that makes sense. So yeah, I just think we need to open our hearts and let that part, that intellect that's like, oh, that's not, well, that sounds and just close that down for a minute. Stop being so arrogant. Stop thinking that we are so superior and so smart and that we know so much. And just take a moment to say that maybe there's a better way, a gentler way, a more loving way to live on this planet. And if there is, let's be the first ones to start moving in that direction. All right. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.